I'd like to begin, of course, by saying that the University of Melbourne acknowledges the traditional owners of the unceded land on which we work, learn, and live, the Wurundjeri, Woiwurrung, and Burrarung peoples. The university also acknowledges and is grateful to the traditional owners, elders, and knowledge holders of all Indigenous nations and clans who have been instrumental in our reconciliation journey. We pay respects to the elders, past, present, and future, and acknowledge the importance of Indigenous knowledge in the academy. My name is Sami Shah, and I am a lecturer here at the Centre for Advancing Journalism, and also the host of the Ear to Asia podcast, which is produced by Asia Institute, which I'm sure you all already subscribe to, and are avid listeners of, and will give a 5-star review and rating when we're done. And before we go any further, welcome to the 25th anniversary of the Asia Institute. A big round of applause, please. We're gathered here today at the Sidney Myer Asia Centre with colleagues from both the arts faculty and the broader university community, as well as invited guests and friends of the Asia Institute. Today, the Institute is the home of the study of Asian languages and society at the University of Melbourne. The academics at the Asia Institute are at the forefront of research into the intellectual, legal, politico-economic, cultural, and religious traditions and transformations of Asia and the Islamic world. Before we go any further, I would like to invite Professor Vedi Hadiz, who has been at the Institute since 2016 and is the director of the Asia Institute since 2018, to please give us a few words. Thank you, Vedi.
Okay. Thank you very much. I will stand up because I'm so bloody short. So thank you, everybody, for attending the celebration of the 25th anniversary of the Asia Institute. It's, of course, a very special day for us, and we appreciate that you've given your time to help us celebrate this milestone event. Thank you to our staff and our students who are here, and, of course, to my colleagues, from the faculty. We have some of the leaders of the faculty here. And thank you as well for other members of the academic community here from the University of Melbourne more generally. I'd also like to thank our partners. I won't name you one by one because there's many of you. And they consist of individuals, but also members of the diplomatic corps here in Melbourne. And also we actually have some guests from a university in Indonesia. And so we're really very happy that our colleagues have sort of devoted the time and expenses and so on to come over here. So that's the first thing I'd like to say. Thank you, everybody, for coming here. Now, my basic spiel is that the Asia Institute is the main Asia-facing research, teaching, and engagement entity within not just the Faculty of Arts, but within the University of Melbourne. We are a school within the Faculty of Arts, but we are also a hub for the coming together of expertise on Asia throughout the university, and we are also a hub in terms of connecting our colleagues across the university to their counterparts in Asia. So we are a school, but I think we're a bit more than that as well. We are a hub, I think, okay? Now, I also like to say that the University of Melbourne is about 170 years old, and for about 150 years of that history, it thought that it was in Europe. And it's really been in the last maybe 15 or 20 years or so that we've devoted a lot of time and attention and investment into our Asia teaching and research and engagement. Now, I have also said, not least to the VC, that if the University of Melbourne wants to have a global impact, it needs to first have an impact on its immediate neighborhood. And its immediate neighborhood is Asia, right? And from that point of view, we have an advantage over Oxford, Harvard, and the like. Why? Because we're here in the region. So if we do want to be, that global university with a big impact, we have to make sure that we do, pay attention to the region that we're in. So, and I know Sammy's going, I'm going to shoot this guy. He's never going to stop talking.
Don't worry, Chloe's on charge of that. Yeah.
Just very quickly, I'd like to say that if you follow the logic, that I've tried to sort of state there, what is good for the Asia Institute, meaning investment in the Asia Institute, is good for the faculty, and it is good for the university, and it is good for Australia itself. So again, thank you everybody for coming here, and thank you for celebrating our milestone 25th year anniversary. Thank you.
Just a bit of a rundown of the proceedings for the rest of the evening. Professor Andrew Rosa, who has been at the Institute since 2017 and serves as the current Deputy Director, will be the incoming 2025 Director of the Asia Institute, will be speaking to us later. There'll also be a panel discussion in a bit with the current and honorary staff, casting a spotlight on the past, present, and future of the Institute. We'll also, at that point, at the end of that panel discussion, have a portion of Q&A with the audience. So if you have questions, I'd be thrilled for you to raise your hands and we can ask those questions. I think we have a roving mic? We have a roving mic. So hold your questions until that portion. And we will also take a moment to recognize outstanding contributions to the Asia Institute online journal, the Melbourne Asia Review. That's all coming up. First, though, Professor Michael Lee, former director of the Melbourne Institute of Asian Languages and Societies, which is what this was called from 2004 to 2006, MILES was, I believe, the acronym, will present a video of the history of the Institute.
Welcome to the 25th anniversary of the Asia Institute. I'm Michael Lee. My time as director of the Asia Institute was from 2004 through to the end of 2006, which in some ways was the apex of my academic career. Starting here in 1959 as an undergraduate in economics and political science, over 40 years earlier, I had the privilege to have my curiosity about Asia awakened by several teachers. Notable were Wilfred Prest's incisive command of economics, McMahon Ball's recounting his immediate post-war visit to Indonesia, and 2 years of frustration as the Commonwealth representative in Japan working under General MacArthur. Then, of course, there was Hugo Wolfson in his heyday, who was fascinated by India, and Arthur Huck by China. Herb Feith, who started the volunteer graduate program in Indonesia, had been a post-war undergraduate at Melbourne University, along with my father just a decade earlier. And he was another key mentor. Jamie Mackey not only taught about Indonesia, but led the immigration reform group, highlighting just how the White Australia policy sabotaged our building ties with our newly independent neighbours, and publishing Control or Colour Bar. In March 1960, when the police massacred 69 black protesters in South Africa, our Prime Minister Menzies said that that was just an internal matter for the Union of South Africa. Prime Minister Verwoerd responded that his apartheid government had no better friend than Australia. So many of us could visualise a comparable racialised Australia, a white enclave separating itself from its vibrant, emerging, independent neighbourhood. So the challenge for us was not just the end of white Australia, but to understand the Asia in which we live. The teaching and research on Asia at the University of Melbourne throughout the 1960s, 70s, 80s and into the 90s had been somewhat fragmentary, relying upon dedicated individuals in their respective academic departments until, at the end of 1997, the new Vice-Chancellor, Alan Gilbert, decided that Asian languages, culture and internationalisation needed to be given a higher priority right across the university. On the 1st of February 1998, the Melbourne Institute of Asian Languages and Societies was established with a university-wide remit and began teaching in October that year. The following year, the Sidney Myer Asia Centre building construction began. Strong external support from the Myer Foundation has been a key driver of Melbourne University's commitment to Asia. Professor Merle Rickliffs, who had led the ANU's Research School of Pacific and Asian Studies for the previous 5 years, was invited to lead Miles, reporting directly to the Deputy Vice-Chancellor, Professor Peter McPhee. He worked tirelessly to raise the profile of Asia in the university and beyond. However, in 2004, when Miles was absorbed into the Arts faculty as a department, Merle resigned. I'd been recruited that year and had the unexpectedly challenging task of stepping into the shoes of an incredibly talented writer and researcher whose scholarship was of such high order. Merle and I had been fellow PhD students at Cornell, but our paths had explored quite different disciplinary domains. Following the 2004 Boxing Day tsunami, the Melbourne University community sought to reach out to help reconstruct a devastated community. 30 years earlier, I had the experience of being seconded from Sydney University for 3 years, teaching a cohort of Indonesian researchers in Aceh, and we could build upon those personal and institutional linkages. What the Institute started as a voluntary effort came to be a consortium of 8 Australian and 4 Indonesian universities, backed by the Myer Foundation and then by the governments of Australia and Indonesia, under the leadership of Miles. Some 575 local participants took part in our research, training and mentoring, almost half of whom were women, an incredible breakthrough in conservative Achenese society. Advanced level trainees were each mentored by both an Indonesian and an overseas scholar, drawing some 35 mentors from universities in Asia, Europe, Australasia and the Americas. The Aceh Research Training Institute brought nearly $4 million of research funding to the university over its duration, finally wrapping up in 2010. In February 2006, Miles was renamed the Asia Institute in a ceremony attended by the Chancellor and Deputy Vice-Chancellor Peter McPhee, accompanied by an enthusiastic troupe of Japanese taiko drummers, their music being heard throughout the campus. Why the change of name? The impetus for renaming was that Asia did not appear until the 5th word in our full name, the Melbourne Institute of Asian Languages and Societies. That had become quite serious as Miles was then well down the list of sites that came up in any online query that was Asia-focused. Even one of our university deans, who I met for the first time, asked me, "What is this, Miles, and how far does it go?" Our initial choice was to use the name Asia Institute Melbourne, AIM, but given Australians' proclivity to use abbreviations, one wag quickly pointed out that AIM was a well-known toothpaste, so we squeezed out of that one just in time. So the Asia Institute is what we became and what we now celebrate for its first quarter century. Thank you.
Professor Michael Lee there. Before we move any further, I think it's time now to talk about the Institute, about its past, about its present, and about its future. And to do so, I have quite an incredible panel here to share the stage with me. Vedi, you've already met. Vedi is the professor of Asian Studies, the Assistant Deputy Vice Chancellor, International University of Melbourne, and the Redmond Barry Distinguished Professor, as well as, of course, the Director of the Asia Institute. Anne McLaren is Professor in Chinese Studies here at the Asia Institute. David Tittensaw is a Senior Lecturer in Islamic Studies. And Delia Lin is Associate Professor, Chinese Studies Languages. So please, big round of applause to the entire panel. Let's start with the history then. Let's go back to the past of the Institute. And starting with you then, how has Asia Institute evolved since, we've heard the history now. Then other than the name change, what's happened?
I'm very glad to be asked to speak. Thank you, Vedi, for asking me. It's wonderful. I first came to the University of Melbourne in the year 2000. I first came to the city of Melbourne in about the 1980s. I've seen enormous changes, and I can verify what Michael was saying about Australia's originally Anglophone society and how we've evolved from that. I think one of the things, there is something distinctive about the Melbourne Institute of Asian Languages and Societies, as it then was, which I could highlight. Michael Lee mentioned Alan Gilbert. Perhaps if I just go back a little bit to the 80s and 90s and then lead into it, but there was something special that Alan Gilbert did that I'd just like to point out. So due to various winds of change that were happening, I won't go into them, but I guess people here would all know about the Hawke Keating government and the impact of that in our society. So they were governing Australia from 1983 to 1996, and they did make a number of changes. One thing that they did do was set up something called an Asian Studies Council. It was chaired by Stephen Fitzgerald, who was our first ambassador to China from 1972. And this was a very small group meant to ginger up our whole society and get things going. One thing it did do, and I had a little bit role in this, so I'm interested in it. They wanted to do a survey of what Asian languages were taught in Australian schools. And in 1987, I and someone else undertook this particular project. And we travelled up and down the whole of Australia, every state and territory, to see, okay, who's teaching what in Asia in Australian schools. And we found there was quite a lot, but it was very interesting. For example, when we got to the Northern Territory, Indonesian was so hot, it was everywhere. Everyone was learning Indonesian. I'd be saying, okay, how come you're all learning Indonesian? And they'd say, Indonesia is a canoe ride away. You'd hop in a canoe and off you go, and the island's just over there. When we got to Melbourne, now I come from Sydney, so I was kind of used to the Sydney scene, but in Melbourne, all the top private schools, all those boys' schools, Melbourne Grammar, even Melbourne Girls Grammar, Camberwell Grammar, all these top private schools were learning Chinese. And it was taught as a second language to Anglos, people who looked like me, because there weren't Chinese people in those schools anyway. And I thought that was really weird. Why is that? It doesn't happen anywhere else in Australia. You know what the reason was? The business community, the leading business community of Melbourne, were very far-sighted. And from the 1960s, they said, China's the next big thing. I want my son to learn Chinese. Literally, that's literally how it happened. Yeah? And Carolyn Blackman, who I came to know, taught at their Melbourne Grammar, and she explained it all to me. Yeah? And she had lots of business contacts. So what I learned from that is that whether you learnt a language at school level and at university level, it was very much about the locale, where you were you close to Asia, or it was about business and external circles. It was very interesting. It didn't seem to come from the university or the school itself. It seemed to be external. But then, of course, we had the Hawke Keating government that I mentioned, and they decided to switch attention away from European languages. And there's a number of highlights just to mention too. One was the national language policy of Joe Lobianco, who works here at the University of Melbourne. Some of you may know him. This came out in 1987. It was called A National Language Policy, the first one we'd ever had and the last one we've ever had. We need more, but anyway, it was a great one. And this it singled out a number of languages, some European, some Asian, and said these should be languages of broader learning at school level and university level. Then there was a Rudd report, and this is the same Rudd as Kevin Rudd, of course, who learnt Chinese, honours at the ANU. I met him when he was in first year, incidentally. He was a bright young man from Queensland. He said, "Oh, hi, I'm Kevin, I'm from Queensland." I remember that. His leitmotif when he tried to get elected. Yeah. Very interesting. Okay, but the Rudd report of 1994 was written when he was a public servant in Queensland, and this was a brilliant report which really advocated for Asian languages in schools. So all this was happening, and what was Melbourne doing? Well, the answer is not very much. It was a laggard. All the other universities were doing a little bit more. And with regard to the University of Melbourne, when I finally got here, I was told by senior colleagues the university was very Anglophone and not really interested in Asia. And I think this is probably true for the broader group, but it wasn't true for the leadership, and that's interesting. The original charter of the University of Melbourne was to imitate Oxford and Cambridge. This did include the study of other cultures, but only if they were a colony of interest to Britain. So India was really in it. You know, this was a jewel of the British Empire, so let's do Indian studies. So that was the reason for Indian studies here at the University of Melbourne. And David Pennington, who became Vice-Chancellor in 1988, did show an interest in Asia. He said it should be strengthened. He also said that people coming in at year 12 should get bonus points if they've done a language at the final year of school. So at this time, though, in the 1990s, languages at Melbourne were grouped in what's called a school of languages. So European and Asian were in the same school, which meant, of course, that the Asian languages were not particularly prominent. The European, very well established, high enrolments, doing very well. The Asian ones not really, thriving in that particular sort of context. Now, Alan Gilbert and Michael Lee quite thoughtfully and rightly mentioned him. He became Vice-Chancellor in 1997, and he thought that the Asian languages needed more visibility than it could get in a school of languages. And so this then led to the formation of MILES with 4 languages, Arabic, Chinese, Indonesian and Japanese. And there was a major in Asian studies taught as well. Now, this is not the first time that the Asian languages have been in the group, because in 1988 it turned out there was the Department of Asian Languages and Anthropology, which included Chinese, Japanese, Indonesian and Hindi. So there was nothing in a way that was really unusual about yet another grouping. In fact, the languages are often grouped and regrouped and shuffled and shifted around with great regularity. But there's something special that happened with the Alan Gilbert initiative, and I'd like to stress that. Gilbert made the interesting point that the new institute should be provided, and I'm citing the sources here, with a certain measure of budgetary and structural autonomy. And Michael Lee alluded to that when he said that he had to report to the Vice-Chancellor through courtesy of the Deputy Vice-Chancellor. That was unusual. And the idea was, he said, the new arrangement must be called an institute, not a department, not a school. And the idea was that it would provide a focus for the university as a whole. And this ties in beautifully with what Vedi was saying, so I'm simply repeating, really, what you said. So I suspect this is the reason why we are still an institute, when all the other schools, the other areas in the Faculty of Arts are called schools. The mission was to spearhead and to publicly represent the university's intention to engage with the Asian region. It was to make a statement. As well, because it costs money to set up MILES, because we brought in some top-level researchers in the social sciences in particular, the enrolment sadly were not enough, and so MILES needed cross-subsidisation from the rest of the university for quite a lengthy period, maybe about 10 years, but it was quite a while. As well, at this time we were very fortunate to get a major funding from the Myer Foundation. In fact, just to mention here, the Myer family has played a very big role in the teaching of so-called Oriental Studies at the University of Melbourne. It was Kenneth Myer who originally paid for a chair of Chinese in the 1960s. And here's the reason why we started to have a Chinese program at Melbourne in 1962 with the appointment of Harry Simon from the UK. So the Myer Foundation has always been very important. Anyway, the Myer Foundation provided quite a sizable portion of the funds which built the iconic Sidney Myer Asia Centre that we're all sitting in and enjoying right now. So there was two factors, Alan Gilbert's sense of mission there, all university focus, and the Myer Foundation was what really were very formative influences to the early Myers. At the time of the renaming of the Institute, I remember the celebration well and the expert drumming and how happy we all were. Around that same time, there was something else that we did. We took the Asia Institute's website and we put in links to all the other engagement with Asia in the whole university. It was still possible to do that then. Couldn't do it now. Too much. But you could do it then. And I remember thinking, my goodness, the university's really changed in that 6-year period, because just to think of, China alone, there was, of course, the Asian Law Centre had been ongoing for many, many years. And just thinking of China, geography was a hotbed of activity, and so was architecture, China studies. Even medical studies had a project on mental health in China. It was just amazing what had happened, how the university had, it was just engaging. Another thing that happened at the university is that all this other activity in the faculties, I think most of it relied very heavily on the appointment of brilliant young scholars from Asia, from the Asian region. And without that, it wouldn't have been possible. Now, that was something which happened in the 2000s. And then, of course, we'd always had long-standing networks, which were cross university, China and Indonesia, for example. And then we had the new centres. I think the first one might have been the Islamic Studies Centre. Abdullah can correct me, but my understanding is this was a centre of excellence funded by the Australian Research Council, a brilliant new centre, still going. The China Centre was actually funded by the university as such. I'd just like to mention as well, since I've been here, for 20 odd years, just like to mention some of the challenges that we've had to, go through the surf, ride the wave, etc., that were quite tough. In 2008, the Melbourne model was set up, and I guess everyone in this room would have an idea what that is, but primarily this was you do 3 years of a general bachelor program followed by a 2-year specialty. It meant that law and engineering and architecture and so on were now removed from the undergraduate sector and moved into the +2 or the +3 sector of masters. The transition to the new model was financially quite risky and somewhat perilous. What happened is that the Faculty of Arts suffered from a lot of financial stringency in the early years of this transition. And in 2008, redundancy packages were offered to the whole Faculty of Arts, and in the Asia Institute, about 1/3 of our staff chose to take them up. Of 30 staff, that was about 10 people that we farewelled tearfully at the end of 2008. And it was a real wrench. One consequence of this phase of difficulty was the hiring of more sessional staff to fill in the gaps, especially for the large enrolment programs such as Chinese and Japanese. Now, happily, over time, of course, we replaced these staff with many excellent new appointments, so now we have a full complement of staff. Yeah.
We now have 70 staff.
Oh my goodness, it's amazing, isn't it? Absolutely amazing. The other thing that was very important for us was the Melbourne model included breadth, and I'll just have to explain what that meant. It meant students had to undertake subjects outside their faculty of enrolment. Well, it turned out that the most popular subject was, guess what? Languages. Languages was definitely the most popular. And one consequence of breadth was a huge increase in enrolments in languages, all languages, but especially including Chinese and Japanese, but also, I think, Spanish and French and other languages. We didn't need a subsidy anymore. We could stand on our own 2 feet. Wonderful. And then, of course, there was the influx of international students as well, which greatly favoured us too. So having a solid financial basis is actually fundamental to growth and prosperity. So over time and in more relatively favourable circumstances, we've been able to add further studies such as gender studies, Korean and translation studies, which have added immeasurably to our the intellectual environment of the Asia Institute. Under the directorship of Ki Pu Kung, the Institute set up research clusters, research networks, which have been very successful too in a whole range of really interesting areas. Over the decades, I think best of all, we had the most amazing number of talented postgraduates. It's amazing. It's amazing when you meet them and you see these people, many of whom have very good career outcomes. And I'd just like to mention here, I heard a few weeks ago from my latest doctoral graduate who's just got a tenured post at the University of Venice in China Studies. So a lot of really good things have happened. So just finally, I did mention that Alan Gilbert gave the Institute a distinctive mission, and the word mission is important. Gave it a different mission to the rest of the university and a different name, the Institute. We are different. We are really different. We speak the languages of Asia and the Middle East. We've spent many years living and working in the regions, and I think we still have this sense of mission that we started out with. It's manifested in our whole of university and our outreach activities. And I'm thinking here of our research projects, of Ear to Asia podcast, which has a long history now, and the Melbourne Asia Review, which is more recent. I'm thinking of the 2 thriving centres, our cross-university networks, and our talented postgraduates. We still represent the cutting edge of the university's engagement with the Asian region and, of course, of Asian populations inside Australia. It's up to others to judge how successful we've been. But I do think that our sense of mission is still very much part of the ethos of the Asia Institute. Thank you.
Thank you, Anne. David, Anne touched upon some of the things that are happening currently now in terms of the Asia Institute's involvement with the university and with the greater society, and I want to expand on that in a little bit. How has the Asia Institute been involved then in the university's increased engagement with Asia?
I think that question is supposed to be
That's for you? All right then. David, you hold that question. Just improvise. Well, you know the question, give us the answer.
All right. Okay, you owe me a beer, mate.
Yeah, fair enough.
I guess there are 2 ways of answering that question. The simple and most tangible way is to just point out that there are many staff members of the Asia Institute that have taken up either formal or informal roles in advising or implementing Asia-related programs within the faculty and within the broader university. I think especially in relation to China, in terms of the faculty, certainly, Indonesia in terms of the faculty and the university, and lately even in terms of Japanese universities' engagement with Japan. But that's an easy way, actually, of explaining it. Okay, we have our people, we're experts, and so the university comes to us to ask for advice if they want to do things in particular countries. But I think there's a more fundamental answer in that we are actually, the advocates within the university of investing in research, teaching, engagement, expertise generally on Asia in basically a circumstance where it is undeniable that the future of the country in which this university is located is tied to that region. Now, of course, since the Hawke-Keating years, it's been the rhetoric. I first came to Australia. I've been back and forth and so on, but I first came to Australia during that time, and I heard all this rhetoric about Australia is now in Asia, our future lies in Asia and all that. But at the same time, I've been here long enough or come back and forth often enough to understand that the actions don't always match the rhetoric. There have been so many different reports on Australia in Asia, the sort of Asia literacy in Asia, the language capacity of Australians in Asia, and all of them show that the rhetoric really has not been matched by enough action to ensure that Australia has the kind of expertise to make it a real sort of player in the region, and also one that is able to negotiate and navigate its way through a very complex and diverse region. Okay, so that's the broad environment in which the university has to sort of cope with, right? Now, within the university, I have to say that, yes, over the last 15 years or so, there's been a shift, I think, where there's a greater recognition and acknowledgement of the importance of the work in and on Asia. But I have to say, because I also have a role at the Chancery level, that's not universal across the university. That there are sections of the university in which there is resistance to working on particular things and in supporting particular kinds of initiatives when it means partnering with Asian institutions. So I think the default position in some parts of the university, not all parts of the university, certainly in some parts of the university, is, well, we've done well working with Germany and America. Why should we shift? Mm-hmm. I mean, that's where the knowledge, where the capital is. That's where the technological knowledge and so on. But what is the population of Asia, right? And Europe is actually decreasing in terms of its size. Asia is getting bigger, right? I mean, do you not want to be involved in the growth, however it's going to turn out in the region, and to sort of help to shape it, and also to be engaged with it, and to make sure that the interest of Australian society actually is met by the kind of engagement that we have. So there is that. I think there are still pockets of Eurocentrism, Anglophilism, and so on in the university, and our role is really to be an advocate, whether it's at the faculty level or the university level, about the importance of Asia to the university, and in terms of its broader mission and its commitment to broader Australian society. So it just, again, so I say, we are a school, right? But we are different in a kind of way. We are a hub in that, for example, people who work on health sciences or technology or agricultural, food production and so on. They will maybe have not sort of country expertise, in the countries of the region, but they are knowledgeable in areas where Australia or this university can have engagements with institutions in the region. So often they wouldn't know what to do, right? And really, formally or informally, we help to provide a conduit to that. So I think that's, it's a less tangible thing than me saying, well, we have people here. But it's an actual thing that we do. And remember, we are also the most multicultural and multilingual entity probably in this whole university, right? And insofar as the university has these ambitions of being, internationalizing, being sort of more diverse, more multicultural, and so on, obviously the Asia Institute plays a major role in that. I mean, we are not only multicultural and multilingual, but we're also multi-talented, right? So, for example, my colleague there is a painter, and he's going to present me, the Asia Institute, with a special painting soon to commemorate the 25th anniversary of the Asia Institute. Now, you know, not a lot of the schools have people who are, you know, experts on, what are you an expert on again? so, you know, he can do his work, and he's got all of these other talents and so on, and he's going to present it to us to commemorate our anniversary. I've just recorded a rock and roll album, which I'll present to anybody who'll accept it. But anyway, I think we present the kind of diversity in terms of the profile of our people, the expertise, background, and so on, which is crucial to the faculties and the universities' ambitions in terms of being a major player, a major force in developing what the VC has called convening power, global convening power. It can't have global convening power if it does not have convening power in the region in which it is located. And I think we help equip the university in doing that.
Well, I want to ask a follow-up question to just that, to that relationship with the region. We've been talking so much about the Asia Institute's relationship with the broader university. What about the Institute's relationship with other similar institutions and universities in Asia when you've gone there, when you've started developing those? What's the reaction been? And what do you think would improve those relationships in the short term?
Well, not just because I'm director of the Asia Institute, but because of my other role, I do have had a lot of experience in dealing with, our partners in other countries. And one of the things that we do, I think, our staff, not just me, can contribute. And I have said this either softly, politely, or not so politely from time to time, is that we can hopefully, raise awareness within the university that the world doesn't all work according to the way that Australia works. Right? I mean, we have people in certain parts of this university that expect the world to have the procedures, the protocols, and so on that Australia has. That is not a very good basis for engagement and partnership. Okay? And I think that because we have these really deep, and broad experiences in working with different institutions in different countries and so on, I think, my hope is that, because I don't think we've been completely successful, to be honest, is that we will have an impact in showing the university that, things, may work well in Australia, but that's, for particular historical, reasons that cannot be replicated in other circumstances. And if we want to work with other societies, we have to know the way the things work over there. I hope we can make a sort of contribution. Another way we do that, I think, is we have very strong connections with the local Asian communities in Melbourne. And I think that is important for the university in terms of making sure that it has, a constituency, within the city in which it is located to support it. And to give it the kind of, to contribute to its cultural knowledge, its to realization of its ambitions for cultural diversity and so on. And that is something that I think we can work on, I think, a bit more. developing these already existing, relationships with the community. And I think that through our Asia Institute's, connections with the Asian communities in the region, we can also sort of contribute to those sorts of relationships being developed in other parts of the faculty and in other parts of the university as well.
Thank you very much. See, you could have done that. From the past, yeah, of course, absolutely. From the past to the present, then let's to the future. I have two questions, and I'm going to ask them to both yourself and Delia. David, what are the challenges for the future, and then what are the opportunities for the future? So whichever one of you wants to start with the challenges, let's go there.
Shall I start?
Yeah, go for it.
Well, thanks very much for the question. I think one of the perennial challenges for the Asia Institute is our aim to provide a holistic set of programs. And by that I mean that we are looking to provide the social, the cultural, political, as well as teaching the attendant languages from particular countries and also wider regions as well. And a recent report, for example, by the Australian Curriculum Assessment and Reporting Authority, otherwise known as ACARA, found that in 2022, only 8.2% of Year 12 students are studying a language. And so this is a historical low for language training at VC level in Victoria, and I think across the country as well. Further, it was noted that between 2010 and 2022, there was a 27.6% decline in the numbers of students enrolled in language courses. And this situation is due to the fact that language study is not compulsory, as it is, like, for example, in some of our European counterparts, like Finland. We don't actually advocate that we have to have a second language. And I know from my own experience, I did 4 years of German and then changed schools, and there was no German in other schools. So that was the end of my language journey with German. And of particular concern for the Asia Institute is a drop in key languages, which are taught at the Year 12 level. For example, again, between 2010 and 2022, Japanese has dropped by 16%. Chinese has remarkably dropped by 33.8%, despite being one of the fastest growing diaspora communities. Indonesian has dropped by 50.3%. And perhaps somewhat surprisingly, Arabic was up actually by 23.4%. But in other words, generally speaking, those programs which are feeders for our universities are in decline. And I was thinking, reflecting on the history as well, it made me think about one of the more remarkable moments that I had when I was coming up through my early university studies, was we were actually visited when I was at Monash University during my honours year, this is in the mid-2000s, by the then Foreign Minister Alexander Downer. And in the midst of his talk, he made an extraordinary admission that they were cutting funding to language programs, and that he's actually unusually quite candid at times. And he actually said that we're doing it because we want to put pressure on the state government. So they were actually sort of saying, we want to make this a state issue. And so this was actually for me quite an extraordinary admission, that he was trying to put pressure on the then Brax government. And I remember thinking that this is actually crazy coming from the top diplomat, who's supposed to be our chief representative, and is having little regard for languages, which is usually in the diplomatic corps one of the key requirements. And it made it clear that even at that level, at that top level, that language was just a political football. It wasn't something that was important. So having that linguistic and cultural understanding is not necessary. And he's also subsequently on the record of saying English is enough. So he's taking that sort of monolingual approach. And I think as a result of this apathy towards language training, both past and present, it means that the Asia Institute continues to fight, I think, what is something of an uphill battle in this particular space. And as a result, we actually have to be more entrepreneurial in the way that we go about trying to put it out there and get people to do language training. And I don't want to be all doom and gloom, and I think actually we are doing many of these things. So I will enumerate some of these things that we're actually doing to fight this challenge. And Anne has also touched on some of these as well. And so I'm pleased to say that actually in my relatively short tenure, I've been here only for a year and a half at the Asia Institute, is that, for example, the Melbourne Asia Review is now publishing widely in both Chinese and Japanese, with translations mainly done by students who are actually in the Masters of Translation program. So it's an integrated work program that they have. And there's a huge corpus, and I've already been told by some colleagues that they're already getting hits from these translations, which is fantastic. And alongside both Japanese and Chinese, we also had some translation in Bahasa Indonesia, and also in some in Hindi and Korean. And indeed, we had our own Adam Zolonik published his article on the feminine man, I think in the Korean context, in both Korean and English, which was the first Korean translation. I'm informed that there's much more on the horizon in that regard. So this is really a fantastic initiative, which is actually putting our language capability, I guess, front and centre, if you like, for a wider audience and to be engaged with in the region in a multilingual fashion. And so, as I said, I think this is a really, really good way of actually pushing back against this challenge. And I think this sort of pushback against the dominance of English in academic publishing is critical. And I really think this is part of a decolonisation that needs to take place in academia, because there's often an overemphasis on the importance of English. And there's also a squeamishness, I find, actually, about people publishing in second languages. And I've actually heard of colleagues saying they get admonished sometimes for publishing in second languages rather than publishing in English. So I think this is a really important initiative and a powerful way of showing the importance of being multilingual, and that we're leading the way in doing that by making our journal accessible in multiple languages to the wider region, the region that we're actually trying to engage with. So we need to also, I think that's a way of putting forward that there are other epistemologies, other ways of knowing and showing that, of being in the world. Indeed, giving a sense of what the uphill struggle is. In fact, one of our very own, Michael Klein, wrote about this on the Australia's language potential, in a book that was published in 2005, where he talked about that there is a monolingual mindset. So I think what I find in terms of the challenge is that even almost 20 plus years on, we're still fighting that same battle of showing that we need to move beyond thinking that English is enough. But I think we're up to the challenge, and we're pushing back.
Thank you, David. I think David's highlighted something that is both a challenge and therefore presents itself as an opportunity. So I feel it's only fair then to ask you as well, what are challenges that you've seen in your time, and are they also opportunities? Are there other opportunities that we have to take?
Thanks very much, Sammy, and thank you for inviting me to speak, and really great to see the great audience here. I joined the University of Melbourne and Asia Institute in 2018 as a senior lecturer, which is the 6th university I've worked at. And prior to that, I was in various academic capacities in China for 4 years, and then in Queensland, both Brisbane and Gold Coast, for 12 years. And just mentioned Cameron Rudd. I taught Cameron Rudd's son, Nick Rudd, for 3 years, actually, at Griffith University.
Is he any good?
He is brilliant. He's much better than his father. I can say that very clearly, and I'm sure that his father will be jealous of him. And then Adelaide for 8 years. And in those universities, I've seen Asian studies and Chinese studies shrink. At Griffith University, the School of Asian Studies, when I joined, there was a School of Asian Studies, disappeared. And at QUT, when I joined, there was a School of Social Sciences and Social Services with so many languages taught, Indonesian, Chinese, and we had Japanese. We had so much fun. Yasu is here. We went back the time at QUT. The whole school disappeared, and only Chinese remained. All the other languages and studies disappeared. Whereas over my time at Asia Institute at University of Melbourne, I've seen growth. And growth I was surprised when I joined in 2018. I was one of the youngest in the Asia Institute. And given all the experience I had before, I thought that was a bit weird. But now I've seen so many great young colleagues joining Asia Institute, and I've seen a great Master of Translation and Interpreting that's absolutely flying, and I've seen this new establishment of the nation's only Master of Contemporary Chinese Studies, and I've seen Korean Studies becoming a minor, now become a fantastic major with our new colleagues joining in. But here I would like to focus on one thing. David has spoken a lot about the challenges in terms of the broader context. I'm going to talk about that as well, but I really want to focus on people and community in there, because over the 6 years, what I've found really inspiring and really encouraging is that I've been fortunate enough and honoured enough to have witnessed this cultural change in a way that we are connected to one another, and we're connected to the broader community, university community, and also to the wider communities, home and abroad. And I felt that really, really encouraging. And let me elaborate on that a little bit. So I'll go back to Sammy's question, the challenges, and within the challenges, where our opportunities are. And the challenges that I want to talk about, and first of all, we're facing some, because we're talking about the future, what we're facing now is really an ever-changing environment. Now, we started with the government. The Albanese government is imposing a flat 35% to 40% international cap on all Australian universities. And Michael Wesley has written a lot on the university's position. Those challenges, we're not alone in those challenges, but it would impact us a bit more because we serve, very proudly so, a lot of international students in Asia Institute. Another big challenge is the ever-changing geopolitical environment, which has a great impact on our students' needs, well-being, and behavior, and also impacts on researchers, including our graduate researchers, education, research, and career opportunities. And Gen AI in AI, we talk about that a lot, is fundamentally changing the ways our students engage with the world and materials, and the ways we undertake education and research work. But it is within, and my view is that the key to addressing those challenges, even though they're common, but impact us a bit more, is really better connectedness and bigger engagement, and which is where I see our strength and opportunities are. And Vedi has just mentioned that we are an incredibly culturally and linguistically diverse group. And because of that experience, we have empathy and understanding, profound understanding of the diverse needs, the cultural assumptions of our students, international and domestic. We're used to diversity. We're used to different mindsets because language is not just a string of codes. It's also different mindset, different ways of looking at the world, and different cultural assumptions. And being able to engage with those cultural assumptions, we understand the difficulties of our students and also our colleagues in navigating the system. And that is of no surprise that we have very high student satisfaction rate in our Asia Institute, both domestic students and international students. And we naturally, we tend to take a people's approach instead of a bureaucratic approach to issues. For example, academic misconduct in the AI era. Whenever we see a problem, the first thing we do is to talk to the students. We don't go through this bureaucratic channel first. We actually chat with the students, understand the difficulties and challenges before we go further, which also means that we spend a lot of time, and we enjoy doing that with our students and with our colleagues as well. And we embrace the incoming changes. During COVID, even though we are experiencing a lot of challenges in teaching students online, we also undertook over the period of 2 years, under Vedi's leadership, of curriculum review, to look at the curriculum, to see how we can break the silos in between our programs. How can we increase engagement? How can we increase domestic student enrollments? How can we provide better services to our staff and students? Look at the curriculum, look at overlaps, and to see how we can create more robust curriculum. And my colleagues have spoken about Melbourne Asia Review, Year to Asia podcast. And another thing that we are doing really well is taking up more leadership in the faculty and at the university to being part of the decision-making process, to understand how the system works, and to take agency in the decision-making process. And many of us have enjoyed the cultural and language lunches that the faculty, and that's IGOGU's portfolio, that associate in diversity and inclusion. And I've received so many emails from the faculty members saying how great those lunches are, how enlightening and inspiring those lunches are. Can we do better than what we've done today? I think we can, because now we're now having so many fantastic young colleagues. And as Vedi says, we have 70 staff members and many education-focused staff members. How can we provide better mentorship? When we have a diverse group, it also means that it's not that easy to navigate the university system. Writing grant applications, writing those argued case for promotion is a genre of its own. And I've spoken to so many colleagues who are saying that they feel they're not themselves when they're writing those. It's torturous to write those documents. And I know it happens to everyone, but how can we provide better services and better mentorship, a buddy system, so that we can all flourish and every single one of us can flourish in this environment? And as Vedi just said, we have multi-talented, not just multilingual, multicultural, multi-talented, but also multidisciplinary staff members. Not only staff who are experts in teaching languages as a second language, but also we have linguists, social linguists, we have historians, sociologists, political scientists. We have, I mentioned historian, first of all, historian, and many experts. And how do we help or encourage engagement with broader faculties to look at some broad issues from a particular perspective and enrich disciplines as a whole? And how can we take leadership in student experience, both for domestic students and international students, given our diverse expertise and also our in-depth understanding of the students? And how do we celebrate successes? And how can we create an environment where voices are heard and diverse needs are met? How can we take agency in decision-making process in the school, in the faculty, and at the university? It's through those processes, through those engagement, that we're able to make changes, and we are doing that already. I remember not long after I had arrived at Griffith University back in 1997. At that time, there were not many international students, let alone international research students. I remember at the time, Griffith University would only give out 2 international scholarships. And not long after I had arrived, a professor in philosophy, Wayne Hudson, saw me on campus and said, "Are you homesick?" With no hesitation, my response to him was, "I'm home. I'm not sick of it yet." And can we make Asia Institute the home for Asia expert, home for the best education and student experience, and a home where everyone feels they're taking agency in institutional decision-making, and a home where everyone grows, shines, and flourishes.
Thank you, Delia. We're going to open the floor to questions in a second. We have a question over there in the corner, please.
My name is Muan. I'm a dinosaur from last century, having studied Japanese back in 1974. So if I go back that far, I think it's fair to say that Asia Institute has a history which is much longer than 25 years. But the most important bit I want to talk about is this, that the common room back in 1974 was a melting pot, because you get a chance to talk to students from different faculties, whether they're doing Japanese or something else. And that is where you learn a lot about cultural awareness. And I'm not an academic, I have no clue about theory. But the important bit is that if we can give our students an awareness of the culture in Asia, the ability to understand things from a very high level, then they can be very successful with their careers. So I would take a different approach, forget the studies, forget the theories, but if we can learn more about the social, geopolitical, cultural, then you will be very successful in the Asian region. And I'm glad to say that after 50 years, coming back to the Asia Institute, that ethos is still there. The ability to communicate with one another and to learn from one another. So I think you guys did a good job. Thank you.
Well, I guess I'd like to springboard off of that into a bit of a question, is that yes, we do get caught up so much into the practicalities of teaching and students coming in and out. Is that milieu, that kind of melting pot approach that was there before, where students could gather and learn from each other, is that something that still exists? Or is there, you're seeing more of everyone kind of going off into their own communities and their own sides and not mixing and melding as much?
You'll have to ask the others. I'm the boss. I don't do any work.
Fair enough.
I don't do any work.
Yeah. All right. Well, I mean, you're more student-facing, all of you. How common is that now?
Mixing and melding, how do you mean?
Sorry?
When you say mixing and melding, how do you mean?
On campus, in classes, do you see that kind of happening amongst the students? Is there more organic creation of community? Delia understands, yeah.
Probably I can speak to that. Just then I said a little bit about that curriculum review that we were doing during COVID, when everyone was disconnected. And one of the key questions we are asking is that how can we create cross-program engagement amongst the students and the cross-program engagement amongst the staff. So we had so many ideas. We did write quite a few recommendations as to how we were doing that, but it's something that we have in mind because we don't want students to just go into Chinese studies and don't talk to Japanese studies next door, or don't talk to or no idea about Arabic studies or Islamic studies. We really want students to be able to talk to one another. And that is why in our Asian Studies program, we do have language and power, for example, in Asia, where all students from different disciplines can attend and select. So we look at the curriculum and look at how we have Digital Asia. That's one of the outcomes of the curriculum review, that we introduce more generic cultural, linguistic, and also social programs or subjects where students from different programs can attend so that they get different perspectives.
Thank you.
Yeah, we have actually been actively cross-coding subjects. For example, we just started Islam and Gender this year, which has been now also cross-coded with gender studies. And so we're getting gender studies students coming in who haven't necessarily had any experience with the Islamicate world, and then they get an entry point into that. And we also do that in our politics program as well. So we are trying to do that cross-pollination across programs, so it's not just siloed. Yeah.
You've talked about a little bit, but we were talking about opportunities and how there are certain challenges and opportunities that the Asia Institute faces. How deep is that engagement with local communities, and is there still space to improve there, and what resources are needed?
We do a lot of activities that involve community engagement, and while I applaud a lot of what has been done, I would have to say that one thing that we haven't got up to would be to develop activities where a diversity of communities would be involved. So we tend to have, let's say, in our activity, it's for the Chinese community, it's for the Korean community, it's for the Indonesian community. All right, it could be a seminar, it could be a cultural event or whatever, but we know it is for that particular community, right? That's a start, right? Because we have to have, the sort of, we have to have the links, right? But I think the next step really is to imagine activities that are cross-cultural. So often when we say cross-cultural in this university, it's Australia and the rest. Right? But actually, all these communities are different from each other. And when they do meet with each other in a particular geographical space, or even virtual space, if talking AI, it may be one of their first experiences of cross-cultural communication. And it's the same thing with the way I think the university deals with international and domestic students. It's as if, well, there are two categories, domestic and international. But the international, they're from China, they're from India, Indonesia, whatnot, right? And what we often forget is their first experience of cross-cultural communication is here in the University of Melbourne. the first time that a Chinese student will befriend a student from Cambodia or from the Philippines or whatnot, right? So this is the sort of thing I think we should be, thinking about and imagining further, making it possible for this cross-cultural, pollination to take place. Yeah. Yeah.
I want to ask one more question before we can wrap things up, and that's more to do with. It occurred to me, AI Asia Institute, but also AI being artificial intelligence, and the kind of rise of that in not just education and the whole plethora of problems that creates, but also some of the benefits. One of the benefits is being touted is in translation services. AI is being seen as something very effective in real-time translation stuff. How do you think that will impact or influence the future of Asia Institute? How will AI affect AI?
Well, this is more Delia's role.
Medicals out there who are absolute experts in this area, but I'm just going to talk briefly about it because we talk a lot about it in our programs, Master of Translation Interpreting, and also Chinese Studies program. We've got absolutely our AI guru Rachel there, who is developing fantastic learning tools for the students for Islamic studies and Arabic studies. The impacts are going to be huge. AI is not going away. It's just going to be more and more advanced. Best way of doing it, embracing it. It's really to be able, as staff members, we need to know where it's going. Need to test on. I'm testing large language model for my own research, and I'm absolutely learning so much working with data scientists. So different way of thinking about my research questions, different way of looking at my data, different way of collecting data. And especially if you research on authoritarian regimes, it's getting harder and harder to do field work. But if you can deal with a large quantity of data, there are so many findings you can have, but how to do that? How to use ChatGPT. Our students are using ChatGPT, as I've mentioned, that the different way of engaging with the material and with the world. We need to understand why they're doing that, how they're doing it, and then guide them through. And then we need to go back to those fundamental questions of what academic integrity is, what academic honesty is. How can it be honest? Instead of punishing the students and saying, well, sorry, this is alleged academic misconduct because you've got 65 IT score in there. But ask questions, talk to them to say why they're using it, what the frustrations are, what the struggles are. And also, we need to be really on top of that game. We need to be better than our students in terms of AI.
Excellent. I think at this point, we'd like to wrap up the Q&A portion and move on with the rest of the evening. So I'd like one last time to thank Vedi Hadiz, Anne McLaren, David Tittenso, and Delia Lynn. Thank you so much. And now we move towards the awards for the Melbourne Asia Review, for which I welcome Professor Andrew Rosser, current Deputy Director of the Asia Institute and incoming Asia Institute Director from 2025. Andrew? Thank you.
Hello, everyone. Look, it's a real pleasure to be able to present the inaugural Melbourne Asia Review Awards. Melbourne Asia Review is an initiative that we began at the Asia Institute at the beginning of 2020. The publication is now in its fifth year. We have 18 editions under our belt. The publication, I'm told, gets an average of 12,000 page views per month, and we've cultivated a readership in India, Australia, Indonesia, Philippines, the USA, among other places. A number of Melbourne Asia Review articles, thanks to the intrepid efforts of Kathy Harper, the managing editor, have appeared in a number of other publications as well, including very well-known ones such as the Jakarta Post, the South China Morning Post, the Mandarin, Rappler, Hindu. There have been ABC recordings and articles published as well, the Lowy Interpreter. Overall, it's an initiative of which we're enormously proud. We decided earlier this year, when I say we, I mean the members of the editorial board decided earlier this year that we needed to recognise more the work that our authors do, because ultimately without authors we wouldn't have a publication. Melbourne Asia Review is supported by a huge number of staff at the Asia Institute, those people who sit on the editorial board, Kathy, of course, through her work as managing editor, but really it's a huge number of people who are involved, and the authors are especially important. We wouldn't have a publication without them. We decided to make 2 awards, one for the best article and one for the best article by a PhD student. For this year, and this is an award that we hope will become an annual one, we were looking at articles published during 2013, editions 13 to 16 inclusive. We formed a selection committee consisting of members of the editorial board, and they considered a selection of papers recommended by Kathy. So I am happy now to announce, firstly, the award for Best Article by a PhD student. That goes to Alyssa Muin, who wrote an article called "Securitization Contributes to an Anti-Women Backlash in Australian Muslim Communities." That article presents new research which reveals a nuanced connection between the securitization of Muslims in nations such as Australia and the involvement of some Muslim men in anti-women movements. Alyssa, can I invite you to come over here? The award for Best Article goes to Professor Fran Martin for her piece, Education Mobility's Gender Queer Potentials for Chinese Students in Australia, which appeared in edition 16. This paper draws on extensive research by Fran on the developing sex-gender identities of Chinese women students in Australia, an under-researched cohort, and specifically how studying abroad impacted their sense of their gendered roles and identities. So Fran, can I invite you to come up here, please? Our winners, I should say, are getting a complimentary issue of the special print edition of Melbourne Asia Review that we printed last year, as well, of course, as a gift card. So thank you. Now, look, that brings us to the end of our proceedings today. Before we wrap up, however, I would just like to say a big word of thanks to our professional staff team who have helped to organise this event and just make everything happen. So please, can everyone join with me in thanking our professionals? Look, I'd also like to thank all of you for coming along tonight. Our special guests, our staff, our students, our colleagues from elsewhere in the university. The Asia Institute isn't just an administrative unit. It isn't just a couple of floors in this building. It's a community of people, of staff, students, colleagues, and external supporters who all believe, for one reason or another, that educating students about Asia and engaging in research on the region is important, especially in this part of the world, and especially at this institution, one that aspires to be a leading university in the Asia-Pacific region. I hope this community of people will both stay together and grow over coming years as we work our way through the challenges and opportunities that our panel members have discussed this evening. And indeed, as I think it was Vadi noted, we have grown really quite significantly in the last few years. We've welcomed a number of new colleagues who've brought some really exciting skills and experience to the table to help us do our work at the Asia Institute. In essence, it seems to me the purpose of the Asia Institute is to put Asia on the curriculum, to put Asia on the research agenda, and to encourage debate and discussion about Asia within the wider community. It's a really, really important purpose. So I'd like to conclude just by saying, here's to another 25 years of the Asia Institute.